So thank you, Jachi. And now we're going to move to Sizhu.
That's good. Stop sharing.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna share my slides first. Are you able to see it?
Yeah.
In full screen.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
Oh, great. Hi everyone. I'm Sizhu. I'm a PhD student in the stats department, and today I'm very happy to present our recent work on estimating treatment effects with competing intercurrent events in randomized controlled trials. This is a joint work with Yan Yao, Yongming, and Karen, like 3 statisticians from Eli Lilly and Company, with Professor Ting Ye from University of Washington, and also with my advisor, Professor Peng Ding. And here is an outline of today's talk. So as a motivating example, in this Moran paper and Patriot paper, they talked about 2 phase 3 immunology trials where we are targeting to learn the causal effect of baricitinib versus placebo on a disease, systemic lupus erythematosus. So the primary endpoint was an immune response index measured 52 weeks after the treatment initiation. And of course, this is an RCT. Ideally, we'll want to compare between the 2 groups and then attribute whatever the difference in the outcome to the treatment. However, in practice, in the real world data, what we observe is that many of the individuals do not have their outcome measured. So in both trials, there was a significant proportion of them have missing outcomes. So what happened in between the treatment initiation and the measurement of the outcome, I will illustrate using this toy example. So let's consider the 3 patients in the treatment arm. For the first patient, something happened that relocated at probably week 20, so they have to discontinue from the treatment, and therefore we will not observe their final outcome a year later. And for the second patient, also like the severe adverse event occurred in the middle, so they have to discontinue from this treatment. And we also not going to see their why. And for the third patient, which is the ideal case, that nothing bad happened in between, and then in the end, we can measure their outcome. So in this toy example, the treatment discontinuation due to relocation and the adverse event are both called intercurrent events. And more generally, intercurrent events are defined as those events that occur after the treatment initiation. And also it will affect either the interpretation or even the existence of the outcome measurements. All of those events are called intercurrent events. And just a brief preview of what types of the intercurrent events are in the real world data. Like it's possibly some adverse event, lack of efficacy issues, or like physician decision. And sometimes it can be like termination of the site by the sponsor. And in the past, people tend to treat this as a missing data problem because like we are not going to observe their outcome and either use like complete case, which is we know is a biased subsample, or like rely on some very strong identification assumptions. In 2019, this International Council for Harmonization published a guideline that kind of served as to like tell how we should address all those intercurrent events in randomized controlled trials. And specifically, there are 5 strategies that were recommended in this guideline. I'll introduce them like briefly one by one. The first one is called the treatment policy strategy. So this is like very much similar to the intention to treat type of principle. So we just treat whatever happened in the middle as part of the treatment. So that is a like commonly used strategy. A second commonly used strategy is called the hypothetical strategy, which asks the question that what if hypothetically the intercurrent event would not occur? What is the hypothetical outcome that we could have observed in that case? A third strategy is called composite outcome strategy, which modifies the causal parameter of interest. So the idea behind this is like an intercurrent event itself we treat it as informative about the patient's outcome of interest. So for example, in the case when the outcome is an indicator of success or failure, then if we believe that the occurrence of the intercurrent event can be treated as another mode of failure, so it already gives us some information that we want to learn about the treatment effects. And therefore, we can construct a composite variable that includes both pieces of informations. And there are also two slightly less commonly used strategies, the well-on treatment strategy and the principal stratification strategy that I will not talk about them into details. So in this project, our proposal is to combine two of the 5 strategies. So we first classified intercurrent events into 2 broad types. The first type will be something that we believe are effective, informative. For example, the adverse event, the lack of efficacy, which are like very likely to be correlated with the potential outcomes that we are interested in. And then the second type would be something that we believe are effect and informative. So for example, the treatment discontinuation due to relocation or due to the COVID-19 lockdown. Those we can believe some conditional independence between them and the potential outcomes of interest. And then we are going to combine 2 strategies, the composite outcome strategy and the hypothetical strategy, to deal with them. So we're going to essentially deal with these 2 types of intercurrent events using 2 different strategies. And of course, there will be some key challenges combining both strategies. We will need some new theory and method, and we also need to deal with the competing intercurrent events. So I'll illustrate the competing challenge more here. Again, let's go back to the motivating example, this toy example. So for the first patient, we observe like at some point they discontinued from the treatment due to relocation. So we know what is the observed time to event for the effect in an informative intercurrent event. However, and also we want to learn in the hypothetical world, what if this event didn't happen? But we have no idea like if this event didn't happen, hypothetically, whether there will be another adverse event happened before the measurement of the outcome or not. So this censoring problem is due to the fact that these 2 types of intercurrent events are actually censoring each other. So in our proposed method, we're going to solve this challenge. Before that, I'm going to introduce notation. We're going to use this A for the binary in treatment and Y to denote the primary endpoint. And note that, again, like this outcome is not measured immediately after the treatment initiation. It's actually measured sometime after the treatment, and this time is pre-specified. So this K is the measurement time point of the outcome. It is fixed, it is known. In our example, it is the week 52. There are 2 types of intercurrent events, as I just mentioned. We classify them into 2 parts, and we use T and C to denote the treatment informative and uninformative, respectively. So T will be the time to the adverse event in our motivating example, and C will be time to the treatment discontinuation due to relocation. And because we only care about the outcome measured at K, so we're going to define T and C to be infinity when they are larger than K. And because both intercurrent events are actually post-treatment variables, and therefore they both have potential outcomes. And so we're using the potential outcome framework. We use this to denote the potential outcome and impose the consistency assumption. So now I'll introduce what is the causal parameter of interest using the combining both strategies. This tau, the parameter of interest, is defined as the mean expectation between expectation of the difference between 2 arms. And for each arm, for example, if we look at the treated arm, we are actually constructing a composite variable that consists 2 parts. The first part corresponds to the fact that we are using hypothetical strategy to deal with the effect and informative intercurrent events. So we are asking the question that what is the potential outcome controlled C at infinity, which means like controlling for the fact that there is no treatment uninformative event happen before the measurement of Y. What is the potential outcome? And the second part corresponds to the fact that we are using composite outcome strategy to deal with the effect informative intercurrent events. So again, like remind that this effect informative events, we treat them itself as some indicator of whether the treatment has a success or failure of effect. So the two parts again correspond to the two strategies that we are combining. And if we go back to the previous challenge that the things are censoring each other, and we look at like what are the observed intercurrent event types and what are the composite outcomes for all the three patients, we can actually see this challenge more clearly. So in this example, again, for the third patient, we don't observe any type of intercurrent events, and therefore this is the easy case. We're gonna observe the outcome Y. The observed outcome Y will be corresponding to the potential outcome that we are targeting, and we also know this indicator is equal to 0 because no AE happened in between, and therefore the composite outcome is observed. For the second patient, although like the final outcome is like this potential outcome is missing, we know for sure we observe an adverse event, so we know this indicator is going to be 0, and therefore even though the potential outcome of interest is missing, we still observe their composite outcome. And for the first patient, we observe a treatment discontinuation. So we know like C happened first. But in that case, it's censoring both the effect informative intercurrent event and also the potential outcome. So we're not going to observe the composite outcome at all. And to address this to address this challenge, we need to make some identification assumptions to see how we can we can identify and then estimate the causal parameter of interest. The first assumption will be the randomization of the treatment. So we assume this treatment assignment is independent of all the potential outcomes. And of course, this can be guaranteed by the experimental design in an RCT. The second assumption is on the effect and informative intercurrent event time. So we are assuming such an event time is independent of both the potential outcome of interest and the time to event of the other type of intercurrent event. So C is conditionally independent of Y and T. And back to the motivating example, this assumes that the time to treatment discontinuation due to relocation is conditionally independent of the hypothetical potential outcome that we are interested in, and also the time to adverse event given the baseline covariates. So we can treat it as an assumption on the intercurrent event, like the second type intercurrent event. We can also treat it as the kind of like the criteria for classification. So if we believe such a conditional independence, then it's reasonable to use hypothetical strategies to deal with them by assuming this conditional independence assumption. And also we are going to assume the overlap assumption. So like to make sure the identification works. Under these two assumptions, we can show this causal parameter is nonparametrically identified by two different formulas that I'm going to detail one by one. The first one corresponds to an outcome modeling. So it consists of two parts with the conditional mean of the observed outcome on the subsample with no intercurrent event. And we also need the survival probability of the AE time, like the adverse event time, or like more generally, is the distribution of the treatment informative intercurrent events. The second identification formula is a weighting formula, and we are using the inverse probability weighting idea. So here, again, it depends on two indicators, and that will be the propensity score, the conditional probability of getting treatment, and also the conditional probability of not observing censor, this C event up until time K. So we can see like these two identification formulas depend on two sets of nuisance parameters. And here, the identification of the two survival curves, S and G, will follow from the classic survival analysis literature. So there are two basic estimators motivated from the two identification formulas. Of course, like we can just estimate the corresponding nuisance parameters and then plug in the fitted values into this estimators. And So we can construct an outcome regression estimator, we can construct an inverse propensity score weighting estimator, and they are going to be consistent if the corresponding nuisance parameters are correctly estimated. So then it motivates us to think about an augmented conditionally doubly robust estimator. So this is very similar to the classical doubly robust estimator idea by combining the outcome regression and the inverse probability weighting estimators. We just augment the weighting by another outcome regression, and we can show this estimator is actually conditionally doubly robust. What does it mean? It means we have to assume that the censoring, the conditional distribution of the effective and informative intercurrent events are correct. And then under this assumption, this augmented estimator will be doubly robust in the sense that it is consistent if either the propensity score is correct or both of the two outcome modelings are correct. So in the paper, we have more details on that. We can show this augmented estimator actually improves the inverse probability weighting estimator, but it not necessarily improves the outcome modeling. And moreover, it is conditionally doubly robust because we need to assume the censoring model is correct. So is there any way that we can make it robust to meet specification of this model? And we proposed another augmented doubly robust and semiparametrically efficient estimator. So this is constructed based on the efficient influence function. A little bit more details on the technical part is that here, we make it robust to the misspecification of the censoring probability by further projecting of the nuisance tangent space generated by this nuisance, the G, this censoring at random nuisance part. So here we are augmenting the previous estimator, the estimator that is not robust to meet specification of G, further based on this martingales generated by G. So this G is just the Mayer martingale of this C process. And by further augmenting this, we can make this estimator even more robust in the sense that now it is doubly robust. It is consistent for our target parameter if either of the two sets is correctly specified. So the two sets are the first set will be the two outcome nuisance models, and the second type will be corresponding to the weighting estimator. So we can show this efficient influence function estimator actually improves all the previous estimators in terms of robustness, and it will achieve a semiparametric efficiency bound under some conditions on the nuisance estimation. So now I'll go back to the motivating example to talk about the real world application. Again, these are two double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled phase 3 immunology trials. And the trials are trying to learn the effect of baricitinib on systemic lupus erythematosus. And there are 3 treatment arms actually in this in both trials. We have 2 different doses of the treatment and 1 placebo arm. The primary outcome is a responder index, which we call SRI-4. It's measured at week 52. It is itself actually a binary composite responder index based on 2 criteria. First, it's marked as success if we observe improvement in disease activities. And second, without it has to be without worsening of the overall condition or the development of substantial disease activity. So it's a composite combination of both criteria. And the classification of our intercurrent events were into effect informative and effect uninformative. And actually a relatively large proportion of the work had effect informative. And the classification is based on knowledge. So we are going to use these 3 pretreatment covariates to estimate the nuisance. And here are the results for the data analysis. The 2 columns, 2 large columns correspond to the 2 trials. and 4 columns within each of them corresponds to 4 estimators we proposed. So we can see first, there are coherent results across all the estimators, which suggests that it's likely that there's no severe model specification. And we address this point more in the paper that by comparing the pairwise, by making the pairwise comparison between these estimators, it could suggest as something about the practically what are whether it's likely that we have severe model misspecification problems. And second, these estimators, all the estimating results are very different from the ad hoc methods that are widely used before in randomized control trials, which are the non-responder index and also hypothetical, the hypothetical strategy as a whole. So we have more details in the paper. We can see the scientific results are actually very different from those methods, which means by redefining a more clear causal estimand, we are targeting at a different parameter. And also, another scientific finding is that we actually have incoherent results from the 2 trials. Because, for example, if you look at the 4 milligram treatment arm, we can see there is a significantly positive treatment effect, no matter which estimator we are using. But if we look at the second trial, these trials are the setup, everything are exactly the same. It's only the recruitment, the trials are different. So, but in the second trial, we can see there is a null effect, if not slightly negative. So these suggest negative results for drug approval, and therefore this drug was not approved for this SL, the systemic lupus erythematosus disease. So that's it for my talk. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Sizhu. I already see there were some questions during the talk that Peng already answered, but maybe we can now answer some of them directly. So Brad Gulko asked, does the classification of T or C as infinite cause problems in continuous models? It seems like such values are effectively represented as a separate discrete class. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if I understand it correctly, so are you asking that whether the time to events are discrete or continuous? In all the theories, we actually treat them as continuous variables. So they are both continuous time to event variables. But it's also applicable to discrete case. We just need to modify the estimator a little bit.
Okay, I'm not sure whether this answered, but maybe Brad can continue if this is if you want some more clarifications. Okay. Oh, okay. Yes, this actually did answer. Thanks. Okay. So Emma is saying this is interesting. In terms of the double robustness, I assume EVAX is correct in a randomized controlled trial. For G of A of T of X, that seems still strong. Question mark. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So E of X is in RCT, it is definitely correctly specified because we know the truth.
Yeah.
And the censoring process is actually much harder to model, especially if you're using parametric or semiparametric models. And that's what the doubly robust estimator gives us, kind of similar to the literature on doubly robust. Now we can estimate all of the nuisance. It requires the estimation of all the nuisance parameters, but it does not require all of them to be correctly specified. So we can kind of so there are two advantages of these estimators. First, it is more robust to misspecification to one of these models. And at the same time, it also relaxes the rate requirements. So if we check the convergence rate, I didn't have time to mention it, but in order to achieve a more efficient estimator, the requirement on the convergence rate is also more relaxed compared with the basic estimators we we've seen before. Because now it can be written, the reminder can be written as a product of two convergence rate. So it also like, in addition to the robustness of misspecification, we also gain from the convergence rate relaxation. Yeah, but you're absolutely correct that the censoring probability is hard to model correctly, especially using parametric or semiparametric models. So in practice, we can actually do something more flexible, like more data adaptive.
Okay, thank you. I think,
Thank you.
okay, let's see if this was a good answer, if there are more questions. Okay.
Hi, Sizhu. I cannot type in the Q&A, but I just a small follow-up question. So for the identifications assumptions, it seems like you have to build some assumptions on the censoring time and potential outcomes. Is there a way to assess the robustness to this assumption using data?
This assumption is not a testable assumption. So I don't think we can like directly test it using the observed data. But like as I briefly mentioned, I think like this is like more related to the domain knowledge, like whether, for example, like all those type of we observe like the details on those intercurrent events, what are the reasons, and it can be treated as something like whether we believe it is true. So if we feel like, for example, the time to relocation is probably like not that correlated with the potential outcomes. So we believe this is a reasonable assumption. But like I feel like all of them are more re more effects of those current event reasons instead of like testable from data. So it
Thank you so
requires
much.
like more on the data collection procedure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so there was a question which Peng already answered, but maybe you would like to add something about it because it's from Maya Petrova and she's asking if there are any software packages to do the analysis. And Peng said you have an R package, so I was kind of curious whether you wanted to say something more about it. Also for other attendees?
Yeah, sure. So right now we have the implementation codes for all the estimators, and I'm turning it into an R package, and it will be hopefully soon online. But like, yeah, feel free to email me for the current version of the codes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so there are a few other questions actually, lots of questions right now. Okay, so Emma is asking, maybe I missed it in the data, which are of the two types of issues, relocation or adverse events are more common?
Yeah, the effect informative events are actually more common. Like more than 80% of them in both trials were classified as effect informative. So if we go back to this chart, we actually color coded it by whether they like which class they were classified to. So the yellow segments corresponds to those that are purely effect informative. And there's one tiny green segment that corresponds to effect and informative. And all these blue striped segments indicate that there's a mixture. And for those, like these are like somewhat like broader classifications. And if we look at each of the observations in details, we further classified them into one of the two types. But in the end, like the majority intercurrent events were classified as informative. So we use composite outcome to deal with them.
Okay, so maybe that you also partially answered another question, which was on this pie. Let's stay here. So in the other question from Claudia was that you had patients discontinued due to other reasons, and the question was how do you include those patients in the analysis? So do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, yeah, we have patient discontinued. So like I think like for discontinuations, like some of them had protocol deviation, like they got pregnant, and those those type of like event that we believe are not due to a treatment, not to be related to the treatment effect, we classify them as informative. And versus like other cases like severe adverse event and then discontinue, that type of intercurrent events, we classify them as informative.
Sounds good. Okay, then I think in the interest of time, I'll ask you one last question. So Karen Martzban asks, what would the results be if intercurrents are not taken into account at all?
Okay, so I'm not sure. So you're saying like if we just don't ignore all the intercurrent events and do the analysis on the subsample that with complete cases, or like so if we're using only complete cases, then this is very likely to be a biased subsample. So we want to avoid that. There are also like other ways to deal with intercurrent events in the past that are like, for example, in the paper, we also discussed some ad hoc methods, like using one commonly used method, like previously commonly used method is called the non-responder imputation, which is actually not an imputation. They just mark every missing value of y as a non-responder. And that we show will also be a different target from our estimand.
Okay, so sounds good. Thank you, Sizhu. And now I will ask Ying to come back and announce
Thank
next
you.
week. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Let's thank our two great speakers again for the two very interesting talks. For the interest of time, it's a good time to wrap up today's seminar. So, just as a preview of next week. So on next Tuesday, we will have Joseph Antonelli from University of Florida to talk about partial identification and unmeasured confounding with multiple treatments and multiple outcomes. And we will have Carlos Sinelli from University of Washington as our discussant. We look forward to seeing you next week.